in the heart of the Middle East, where deserts breathe with the whispers of empires, and mountains stand as eternal guardians of memory, lies a land that has carried the weight of civilization for over 5,000 years. This is Persia. This is Iran. From the thunder of Alexander's march to the poetry of Rumi, from the glory of Persepolis to the modern struggles that shape its destiny, Iran is not just a country, it is a story written in fire, stone, and blood. A story of kings and conquerors, of scholars and dreamers, of revolutions and resilience. Tonight, we journey through the cradle of one of the world's most enduring civilizations. This is the saga of Persia, ancient, eternal, and alive. History. Long before the world knew the names of Rome, Athens, or even Jerusalem, the fertile plateaus and rugged mountains of Iran nurtured some of humanity's earliest cultures. Archaeological finds in sites like Susa and Tepe Siak reveal civilizations flourishing here as early as the 4th millennium BCE. Clay tablets on temple foundations whisper of societies that understood agriculture, worship, and trade. Long before Europe had emerged from prehistory, these were the ancestors of the Elamites, the first major civilization of this land. The Elamite kingdom, with its capital at Susa, became a center of power and innovation, leaving behind inscriptions that hint at early writing systems and monumental architecture. For centuries, Elam stood as a rival to Mesopotamia, trading blows with the mighty Babylonians and Assyrians, proving that the Iranian plateau was not a passive crossroads, but a force that shaped the destiny of empires. As the centuries rolled on, new tribes drifted across the steppes into Iran, the Medes and the Persians. These Indo-European people would forever change the fate of the region. By the 7th century BCE, the Medes forged a confederation strong enough to topple Assyrian dominance, creating one of the first Iranian empires. Their influence extended across modern-day Iran, Turkey, and parts of Mesopotamia. Yet it was the Persians, led by the legendary Cyrus the Great, who would ignite the flame of history on a truly global scale. Cyrus was more than a conqueror, he was a visionary. When he established the Achaemenid Empire in the 6th century BCE, he built not only the largest empire the world had yet seen, but also one founded on principles of tolerance, administration, and unity. His cylinder, often called the First Declaration of Human Rights, still resonates as a testament to ideals far ahead of their time. Under Cyrus's successors, Darius and Xerxes, Persia expanded into a superpower stretching from the Indus Valley to Egypt, and from the steppes of Central Asia to the Aegean Sea. The empire was bound together by an extraordinary system of governance, satrapies, or provinces, each overseen by a governor but connected through the royal road, which allowed messages and armies to travel faster than ever before. Persepolis rose as a jewel of stone, carved into terraces that still stand as monuments to Persian ambition and artistry. Yet the empire was more than stone, it was a living mosaic of cultures, languages, and religions woven together under Persian rule. It was this unity that made Persia formidable, and this same diversity that made it enduring. The Persians, unlike many empires of their age, did not erase local identities. They preserved them, earning loyalty through respect, rather than fear. But even empires built on vision are not immune to the tides of history. In 330 BCE, a storm came from the west. Alexander the Great, with an army forged in Greece. Alexander shattered the Persian forces, burned Persepolis, and proclaimed himself master of Asia. The fall of the Achaemenid Empire marked not only the end of Persia's first great age, but also the beginning of its eternal role as both prize and battlefield for ambitious conquerors. Yet Persia never truly died. Greek rule, and later the Seleucid dynasty, fused Hellenistic influence with Persian tradition, creating a cultural hybrid visible in art, language, and religion. Even under foreign domination, the Iranian identity endured. waiting to rise again in new dynasties, new empires, and new forms. Persia was not a chapter close, it was a story that kept rewriting itself. By the dawn of the Parthian era in the 3rd century BCE, Persia had reinvented itself yet again. The Parthians, horsemen from the northeast, reclaimed much of the land. Lost to Alexander's successors, they became masters of resilience, using cavalry and guerrilla tactics to resist even the mighty Romans. For centuries, the Roman legions clashed with Parthian horsachers on the plains of Mesopotamia, neither side able to completely dominate. In this struggle, Persia cemented its role as the eastern counterweight to the West, a balance of power that would echo through history. The Parthians were not merely warriors, they were custodians of Iranian traditions, ensuring Zoroastrianism, Persian language, and cultural continuity survived. In their eyes, we see the eternal rhythm of Persia. Empires may fall, cities may burn, but the spirit of Iran always finds a way to endure, adapt, and rise once more. As the Parthians gave way to the Sassanids in the 3rd century CE, Persia entered one of the most defining chapters of its history. The Sassanid dynasty, founded by Artashir I in 224 CE, sought not only to reclaim lost lands, but also to revive the ancient glories of the Achaemenids. Their empire stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Euphrates, from the Arabian deserts to the mountains of Central Asia. Unlike their Parthian predecessors, who had ruled with a loose confederation, the Sassanids centralized their power, creating a strong bureaucracy and a sense of unity that resonated with the grandeur of ancient Persia. At the heart of this revival was Zoroastrianism, elevated to a state religion, its sacred fire temples illuminating the land as symbols of divine order. The Sassanid kings positioned themselves as king of kings, guardians of faith and empire. Projecting both earthly authority and spiritual legitimacy, the Sassanids did not stand in isolation. They were locked in an epic rivalry with another superpower, Rome, later Byzantium. For over 4 centuries, Persia and Rome waged a series of brutal wars that shaped the balance of power across the ancient world. The clash was not only military, but ideological: Zoroastrian, Persia versus Christian. Byzantium. Cities like Antioch and Ctesiphon were captured and recaptured, serving as pawns in a struggle that seemed eternal. This rivalry drained both empires, but it also defined their legacies. Persia emerged as the eastern counterweight to Rome, proving that the world did not revolve solely around the Mediterranean. Persian art, science, and architecture flourished during this period, influencing not only its neighbors, but also the future Islamic civilization that was waiting just beyond the horizon. The Sassanid court glittered with jewels, scholars, and poets, creating a golden age of Iranian culture that the world would never forget. But history often strikes when empires least expect it. In the early 7th century, after decades of exhausting wars with Byzantium, the Sassanids faced a new unexpected force rising from the deserts of Arabia: Islam. Within a few short years, Arab armies fueled by faith and unities swept across Persia. In 651 CE, the last Sassanid emperor, Yazdegerd III, was overthrown, marking the end of 1,000 years of imperial tradition stretching back to Cyrus the Great. The conquest was swift, but the transformation was even more profound. Persia became part of the Islamic Caliphate, its political independence extinguished. Yet, just as it had under Alexander and the Parthians, Persia adapted. Its culture, language, and traditions bent but did not break. Instead, they infused the Islamic world with their own brilliance, reshaping the very identity of the new empire that had conquered them. The centuries that followed saw the rise of new Persian dynasties under the umbrella of Islam. The Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad relied heavily on Persian administrators, scholars, and poets. The Persian language was reborn in a new form, Farsi blending Arabic vocabulary with ancient Iranian roots. Poets like Ferdowsi, through his monumental Shahnameh Book of Kings, preserved pre-Islamic Persian history, myths, and identity in a way that ensured the flame of Iranian culture would never die. Meanwhile, dynasties such as the Samanids, Bides, and later the Seljuks established regional Persian power once more, showing that while the empire was gone, the spirit of Persia was unbreakable. Persian culture did not disappear under Islam. It flourished, becoming one of the brightest lights of the Islamic Golden Age. Scholars in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy transformed Baghdad, Nishapur, and Isfahan into centers of learning that illuminated the medieval world. This fusion of Persian identity with Islam created a civilization that was uniquely Iranian, yet universally Islamic. The old Zoroastrian temples gave way to magnificent mosques, their domes rising like celestial orbs above Persian cities. Calligraphy replaced stone inscriptions, weaving verses of the Quran into art as eternal as Persepolis. But beneath these changes, the essence of Persia endured. Its kings were gone, its empire broken, but its people had found a new empire within themselves, a cultural empire, built not on armies but on language, literature, and spirit. Persia's influence spread across Central Asia, into India, and deep into the heart of the Middle East, leaving a mark so permanent that even today, to understand Islamic civilization is impossible without understanding Persia. The fall of the Sassanids was not the end of Iran's story. It's the rebirth of Persia as the beating heart of an Islamic world that stretched from Spain to China. The Islamic Golden Age brought prosperity, but Persia was not immune to devastation. In the 13th century, a storm of steel thundered across the steppes. The Mongols, led by Genghis Khan's relentless armies, cities that had once glowed with Persian brilliance were reduced to ashes. Nishapur, once a jewel of scholarship, was massacred. Libraries were burned, mosques desecrated, and the earth itself seemed to bleed. For a time, Persia lay shattered under Mongol rule, its great traditions of art and learning silenced by conquest. Yet, even in ruin, Persia's resilience endured. By the time of the Ilkhanate, the Mongol rulers themselves began to absorb Persian culture, adopting Islam, commissioning Persian scholars, and building cities once more. The conquerors had come to destroy, but in time, they too became Persianized, their identity absorbed into the deep well of Iranian civilization. It was a pattern Persia had repeated for centuries. Enemies could break its cities, but never its soul. The following centuries brought Timur another conqueror whose armies swept across Iran with terrifying speed. His campaigns left Isfahan drenched in blood and entire populations uprooted. Yet even the brutality of Timur could not extinguish the flame. Out of the chaos rose new dynasties, but none more transformative than the Safavids in the early 16th century. With Shah Ismail I, Persia was reborn as a unified, centralized state after centuries of fragmentation. More than just a political force, the Safavids defined Iran's religious identity by declaring Shia Islam the state religion. This single decision would forever distinguish Iran from its Sunni neighbors, shaping not only its faith but its politics, alliances, and conflicts for centuries to come. The Safavid era transformed Persia from a fractured land into a cohesive nation with a distinct identity, binding religion, culture, and monarchy into one vision of Iran. The Safavid Golden Age reached its zenith under Shah Abbas the Great in the late 16th and early 17th centuries. His reign saw Isfahan rise as one of the most dazzling cities in the world. With its grand boulevards, turquoise domes, and breathtaking mosques that still stand as testaments to Persian artistry. Silken carpets from Iran filled markets in Europe and Asia, while Persian miniature painting and calligraphy flourished like never before. Diplomatically, Abbas played a dangerous but brilliant game, balancing alliances with European powers against the Ottoman Empire. his greatest rival. Persia was no longer just a regional kingdom. It was a world power, standing proudly between East and West. And yet, like so many empires before, the Safavid dynasty eventually declined, weakened by internal strife, corruption, and the relentless pressure of foreign enemies. Still, the Safavids had achieved something eternal. They had crystallized Iran's religious and cultural identity in a way that would never again be undone. As the Safavids fell, new dynasties rose. Azfrids, Maraz, the Zands, and eventually the Qajars in the 18th and 19th centuries. This was an age of turbulence where Persia faced both internal decay and external threats. The rise of colonial empires in Europe marked a new chapter of humiliation and struggle. Russia and Britain, hungry for influence, carved into Persia's sovereignty, manipulating its rulers and exploiting its resources. The Qajar era was marked by decline, as old Persian pride clashed with modern realities. Yet, even in weakness, Iran's culture thrived. Poets continued to sing, artisans continued to weave carpets of breathtaking beauty, and families continued traditions that stretched back to Cyrus and Darius. But the world was changing fast. Railways, factories, and telegraphs were reshaping. Global power, and Persia was at risk of being left behind by the dawn of the 20th century. The Iranian people had grown restless. In 1906, a constitutional revolution erupted, demanding limits on monarchical power and the establishment of a parliament. It was a bold attempt to modernize governance, inspired by global winds of democracy, yet hampered by foreign intervention and internal resistance. Soon after, oil was discovered in Iran, a blessing and a curse that would define its modern history. The Qajar dynasty crumbled, giving way to the Pahlavi monarchy, which sought to modernize Iran with ambitious reforms, often at the cost of tradition and freedom. Iran was no longer just the land of poets, and Kingsit was becoming a battleground of ideologies torn between modernity and heritage, independence and foreign domination. Persia had survived conquerors, empires, and invaders. Now it faced a new test, surviving the modern world. Culture. To speak of Iran without speaking of its culture is to tell only half the story. Where armies conquered and empires crumbled, it was culture that carried the Persian soul forward. At the center of this cultural identity is language. Persian, or Farsi, is not just a means of communication, it is the lifeblood of Iran's history and imagination. From the ancient inscriptions of Darius carved into the cliffs of Behistun, to the flowing calligraphy of poets inscribing verses on delicate paper, the Persian tongue has remained unbroken through millennia. It is a language of elegance, rich in metaphors, rhythm, and imagery, capable of expressing both the grandeur of kings and the intimacy of lovers. Unlike many languages that fractured or vanished under foreign domination, Persian endured, transforming, but never dying. It became the thread that bound Iranians together across centuries of turmoil, a living testament to resilience. At the heart of Persian culture lies poetry, the crown jewel of Iran's artistic legacy. To Persians, poetry is not a distant art form, but part of daily life, woven into conversations, celebrations, and even politics. The great masters Rumi, Hafez, Sadi, Ferdowsi, Omar Khayyam are not just writers, they are national treasures, whose words continue to echo in Iranian homes and across the globe. Ferdowsi's Shahnameh preserved pre-Islamic myths and heroes, ensuring Persia's ancient identity lived on. Rumi, with his verses of divine love, transcended borders and became one of the most read poets in the world. Hafez's poetry is so deeply loved in Iran that families still open his book at random pages, seeking guidance or inspiration for life's decisions. A tradition known as Fali Hafez. In Iran, poetry is not confined to bookshelves, it breathes in the streets, sung in the bazaar, recited at weddings. and whispered in moments of sorrow. But poetry alone does not define Persian art. Music has long been the invisible bridge between the heart and the divine. Traditional Persian music, with its haunting melodies of the tar, santur, and ney flute, carries a spiritual weight that transcends time. Rooted in the Radifa collection of ancient melodic patterns, Persian music is both deeply personal and universal, capable of expressing joy, longing, mysticism, and resistance. For centuries, music accompanied poetry, turning verses into living songs. Sufi gatherings, known as sama, used music and dance to reach states of spiritual ecstasy, while court musicians elevated celebrations into moments of transcendence. Even today, in Tehran's hidden cafes or in rural villages, the echo of Persian instruments carries the memory of a civilization that has always sought beauty, even in hardship. Music, like poetry, is not an escape from Iran's struggles. It is a way of enduring them. Beyond music and poetry lies the visual splendor of Persian art and calligraphy. The brush of the miniature painter created worlds of incredible detail, gardens where kings feasted, battles raged, and lovers met beneath moonlit skies. These paintings, often accompanying manuscripts, were not mere illustrations, but windows into the Persian imagination, blending reality with myth in jewel-like colors. Calligraphy, too, became a sacred art, where the Persian script transformed into flowing rivers of ink that turned words into beauty itself. Every mosque, palace, and book bore this artistry, reminding the viewer that in Iran, language was not just spoken, it was painted into eternity. Persian carpets, another art form, became so prized that they spread to royal courts in Europe and Asia, admired not only as floor coverings, but as woven poetry. Each carpet told a story of flowers, gardens, and cosmic patterns that carried the Persian dream of paradise into every home. What unites all these artistic traditions? Language, poetry, music, painting, calligraphy, carpets is not simply beauty, but a profound search for meaning. Persian culture has always wrestled with the great questions: what is love? What is destiny? What is the soul's journey in this fleeting world? Unlike cultures that celebrated conquest or material power, Persia often turned inward, seeking the eternal through art. This is why Persian culture remains magnetic across centuries. It speaks not only to Iranians, but to all of humanity. In every Persian poem recited, in every carpet woven, in every song played on the ney, there is a reminder of something universal: the longing of the human spirit to find beauty, truth, and transcendence in a world that is often filled with suffering. Betz is the essence of Iran's cultural soul, fragile yet unbreakable, rooted in the past yet reaching for eternity. No culture is complete without its celebrations. And in Iran, festivals are not merely dates on a calendar. They are threads weaving past and present together. The most significant of these is Nowruz, the Persian New Year, celebrated on the spring equinox. Rooted in Zoroastrian tradition and older than Islam itself, Nowruz marks the rebirth of nature and the renewal of the human spirit. Families prepare for weeks in advance. Homes are cleaned in a ritual known as Kena Tekeni, spring cleaning, symbolizing the cleansing of the soul. On the day itself, families gather around the half-seen table, arranged with 7 symbolic items, beginning with the Persian letter S: apples for beauty, garlic for health, sprouts for rebirth, and so on. Fire-jumping ceremonies light the nights before Nowruz as people leap over flames, chanting for sickness and sorrow to be burned away. For Iranians, Nowruz is not only a holiday, it is a sacred inheritance, one that unites Zoroastrian, Muslim, Christian, and Jewish Iranians alike under a banner of shared joy. Beyond Nowruz, Iran's cultural calendar is rich with traditions that reflect both its pre-Islamic roots and Islamic faith. The mourning rituals of Ashura, commemorating the martyrdom of Imam Hussein in Karbala, are among the most powerful and emotional events in Shia Islam. Streets fill with processions. Poetry is recited, and passion plays, known as taziyah, reenact the tragedy in dramatic fashion. These rituals are not mere performances, they are deeply spiritual acts, binding communities together through shared grief and remembrance. Another cherished celebration is Yalda Night, the longest night of the year, when families stay awake until dawn, eating pomegranates and watermelons, and reciting the verses of Hafs. These festivals, both solemn and joyous, reveal the dual heartbeat of Persian culture, one of resilience in sorrow and exuberance in celebration. Alongside festivals, Persian cuisine is a feast for both the body and soul. Iran's food is not just nourishment, it's poetry served on a plate. The dishes reflect Iran's geography and history, blending influences from Central Asia, the Middle East, and the Mediterranean, yet always uniquely Persian. Saffron, pomegranates, pistachios, and herbs form the palette of Persian flavors. Fragrant stews like ghormeh sabzi simmer for hours, filled with herbs, beans, and dried limes, creating a taste both earthy and heavenly. Rice, perfected in the Persian tradition, becomes art in the form of chelo and tadig, the golden, crispy crust at the bottom of the pot, cherished like treasure. Kebabs sizzle over charcoal, while sweets like baklava and gaz melt with honeyed richness. To share food in Iran is not only to eat it, is to enter into a bond of hospitality and warmth. A tradition that has endured since ancient caravans rested on the Silk Road. Traditions in Iran extend far beyond the dining table. Family life is the cornerstone of society, with deep respect for elders and strong ties between generations. In Iranian homes, hospitality is sacred. A guest is treated as a blessing from God, welcomed with tea, fruit, and endless warmth. Weddings remain elaborate affairs, filled with symbolic rituals, candles lit for light, sugar cones ground together for sweetness, mirrors reflecting the couple's new life. In rural villages, traditions are preserved in their purest forms, with ancient dances, folk songs, and crafts still practiced as they were centuries ago. In cities, modernization has transformed lifestyles, but even in the bustling streets of Tehran, cultural rituals are never far from reach. Whether in simple acts, like offering tea, or in grand celebrations, like a wedding, tradition is the invisible thread connecting Iranians to their ancestors. What emerges from Iran's festivals, cuisine, and traditions is a culture deeply rooted in community and continuity. Every ritual, every dish, every gathering is a reaffirmation that Iran is not merely a land, is a living heritage. Despite wars, invasions, and political upheavals, these traditions have endured, passed down not in books or decrees, but in homes, kitchens, and family gatherings. They are the quiet strength of a nation that has survived for millennia. To outsiders, Iranian culture may appear exotic, but to Iranians, it is life itself, a rhythm of seasons, a cycle of rituals, and a bond of family that cannot be broken. In a world that often rushes toward change, Iran's traditions stand as a reminder that true strength lies not in forgetting the past, but in carrying it forward into the future, generation after generation. If poetry is the soul of Persia, then architecture is its body, a physical expression of beauty, power, and devotion. Across the land, cities rise like open-air museums of human imagination, where each dome, arch, and tile whispers centuries of history. The ruins of Persepolis still speak of Achaemenid grandeur, with its colossal staircases carved with delegations from across the empire. Later, the mosques of Isfahan, such as the Shah Mosque and Sheikh Lotfallah Mosque, transformed architecture into prayer itself, their turquoise domes shining under the sun, their interiors lined with infinite blue tiles that seem to mirror the heavens. Persian gardens meticulously designed with flowing water, symmetrical pathways, and lush trees were not just places of leisure, but reflections of paradise, inspiring gardens as far away as Mughal, India, and Renaissance Europe. Architecture in Iran was never mere construction, it was storytelling in stone, a declaration of harmony between man, nature, and the divine. But Persian culture did not only build in stone, it built in thought. Iran has long been a land of philosophers, mystics, and dreamers who sought to unravel the mysteries of existence. Zoroaster, the ancient prophet of Zoroastrianism, gave Persia one of the world's earliest religious philosophies, emphasizing the eternal struggle between truth and falsehood, light and darkness. Later, Islamic scholars in Persia carried this legacy forward, weaving together Greek philosophy, Islamic theology, and Persian mysticism. Thinkers like Avicenna ibn Sina, whose canon of medicine became the foundation of medical science in both East and West, and Al-Farabi, whose philosophical works bridged Plato and Aristotle with Islamic thought, left intellectual legacies that endured for centuries. To be Persian was to ask questions about the universe, to see knowledge not as an end, but as a path to wisdom. Yet perhaps the most enchanting dimension of Persian culture is its mysticism. The Persian Sufi tradition transformed faith into poetry, philosophy into music, and prayer into dance. Sufis believed that the human soul was on a journey toward union with the divine, and their teachings gave birth to some of the most beloved works of literature. Rumi's Verses of Longing, Hafez's Odes to Divine Love, and Adder's Conference of the Birds are not just literature, they are spiritual roadmaps. In Sufi gatherings, the spinning of the dervish and the sound of the ney flute created an atmosphere where heaven and earth seemed to meet. Mysticism gave Persian culture a unique emotional depth, the idea that love, not law, is the true path to God. This spirit of Sufism has resonated far beyond Iran's borders, making Persian mysticism one of the most universal expressions of the human soul. Art in Iran has always been about more than aesthetics. It has been a way to preserve identity in times of struggle. When empires fell and conquerors burned cities, art became resistance. Carpets carried hidden symbols of resilience. Miniatures preserved lost epics, and calligraphy became a sanctuary for the sacred word. Even in modern times, Iranian cinema claimed across the globe for its depth and humanity continues this tradition of turning struggle into beauty. Directors like Abbas Kiarostami and Asghar Farhadi use the lens not just to tell stories, but to reveal the soul of a nation grappling with modern challenges. Through art, Iran continues to speak to the world, reminding us that even when silenced politically, a culture can never truly be silenced if its artists still dream. Taken together, Iran's culture, its architecture, philosophy, mysticism, and art forms a mosaic of extraordinary richness. It is a culture that does not just remember its past, but actively lives it. From the gardens of Shiraz to the bustling streets of Tehran, the Persian spirit endures in every dome, every verse, every shared meal, and every whispered prayer. It is a spirit that has absorbed conquerors, survived revolutions, and transcended borders, always carrying within it the eternal search for truth, love, and beauty. To understand Iran is not simply to study a nation, is to step into a civilization that is sought across thousands of years, to unite the material and the spiritual, the fleeting and the eternal. Persia's culture is its most indestructible empire, one that continues to shape not only its people, but the imagination of the world. Economy. From the very beginning, the Iranian plateau has been more than just a crossroads of civilizations. It has been a treasury of resources. The rugged mountains of Iran are laced with minerals, copper, iron, silver, and more recently, uranium. Fertile valleys, nourished by rivers and underground water channels, called qanats, sustained agriculture for thousands of years, making Iran one of the first places where humans cultivated wheat and barley. Ancient Persia's economy thrived not only on farming, but also on craftsmanship. Artisans produced textiles, ceramics, and jewelry that dazzled both commoners and kings. Yet Persia's greatest strength lay in its position at the heart of Thai, the ancient world linking East and West. From its earliest days, Iran's wealth was not merely what it produced, but where it stood, at the center of the world's arteries of trade. The Achaemenid Empire, under Darius the Great, institutionalized this economic strength through innovation. Roads stretched thousands of kilometers with the famous Royal Road, connecting Sardis in Anatolia to Susa in Persia. Couriers could carry messages across the empire in days, but more importantly, merchants could carry good spices, textiles, and precious metals on routes that would later become part of the Silk Road. This network transformed Persia into an economic powerhouse. Markets buzzed with traders from India, Greece, Mesopotamia, and Central Asia, each leaving behind more than just goods. They brought languages, religions, and ideas. The Persian Empire's system of standardized weights, measures, and coinage was revolutionary, laying foundations for global commerce. For centuries, the prosperity of Persia came not from isolation, but from its openness to exchange. Agriculture remained the lifeblood of Iran's economy through the centuries. The ingenious system of qanats, underground channels that transported water from mountains to dry plains, allowed crops to flourish in arid lands where rain was scarce. This ancient engineering marvel sustained villages, cities, and dynasties. Wheat, barley, fruits, and nuts became staples, while Persian gardens cultivated saffron, pomegranates, pistachios, and roses, the raw materials for luxury goods and trade. Persian carpets, dyed with natural colors from these same plants, became world-famous symbols of wealth and artistry. Agriculture was more than survival, it was culture, shaping cuisine, festivals, and trade routes. Even today, pistachios and saffron remain global exports, linking modern Iran to the ancient traditions of its farmers. As centuries passed, Iran's role as a trade hub became even more central. The Silk Road carried Chinese silk, Indian spices, and Central Asian horses through Persian markets, where merchants dealt in goods that would eventually reach Venice, Cairo, and Istanbul. Persian cities such as Tabriz, Isfahan, and Shiraz thrived as cosmopolitan centers of commerce, attracting not only traders but also scholars, architects, and artists. Caravanserais fortified inns along trade routes offered safety for travelers and became hubs of cultural exchange. The wealth generated from these networks supported dynasties and funded magnificent architecture, from palaces to mosques. In many ways, Iran's economy was its greatest weapon, making it too valuable to be ignored by empires east and west. Yet this prosperity also made it vulnerable, inviting envy, invasion, and foreign control. By the dawn of the modern era, Persia's economy faced both opportunity and danger. While agriculture and trade remained strong, the Industrial Revolution sweeping Europe had not yet touched Iran. The Qajar dynasty struggled to modernize, while foreign powers eyed Iran's strategic resources and location. Concessions were granted to Britain and Russia, giving them control over railroads, banks, and even customs duties. The Persian economy, once proud and independent, began to slip into dependency. And then came the discovery that would change everything: oil. Hidden beneath Iran's soil lay one of the largest reserves of petroleum in the world. It promised unimaginable wealth, but also unleashed a century of struggle as foreign powers and domestic rulers fought to control the black gold that would define Iran's modern destiny. The year was 1908 when the first gush of oil erupted in Masjid Suleiman, in the Khuzestan region of southwestern Persia. Black smoke rose against the desert sky, announcing the birth of a new era, not only for Iran, but for the entire world. This discovery would propel Persia from an ancient land of caravans and agriculture into the center of modern geopolitics. Almost immediately, the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, later known as BP, took control. With British interests dominating extraction and profits, Iran's own people saw little of the wealth flowing from their soil. Oil revenues, instead of building schools, hospitals, or industries at home, fueled the engines of British ships and lined the coffers of foreign investors. For many Iranians, this was not a gift of nature, but a curse, a constant reminder that their destiny was being stolen barrel by barrel. As the 20th century advanced, Iran's rulers attempted to harness the wealth beneath their land. The Pahlavi dynasty, established in 1925 by Reza Shah, sought to modernize the nation. Railroads stretched across deserts, factories emerged in cities, and industries from textiles to steel began to take root. Yet modernization was uneven and often controlled by the elite. Oil revenues provided the financial backbone of these projects, but most contracts still favored foreign corporations. Iran's economy grew, but it was fragile, tied tightly to oil and vulnerable to fluctuations in global demand. For ordinary Iranians, farmers in the countryside, shopkeepers in bazaars, and laborers in oil fields, the promise of prosperity often felt distant as inequality widened between rulers and the ruled. In the early 1950s, a bold leader emerged, Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh. He nationalized Iran's oil industry, challenging British dominance and declaring that Iran's resources should belong to its people. The move electrified the nation, igniting a surge of pride and hope. Crowds filled the streets, believing at last that Iran's wealth could be used to uplift schools, healthcare, and infrastructure. But such defiance came at a price. In 1953, with the backing of the CIA and MI6, Mossadegh was overthrown in a coup that restored the Shah's absolute power. The oil once again flowed under foreign-controlled agreements, and with it, resentment grew deeper among Iranians. This turning point was not just about economics, it was about sovereignty, dignity, and the struggle of a nation to stand tall against global powers. The decades that followed saw a paradox. Under Mohammad Reza Shah, Iran experienced what was called the White Revolution. Oil revenues skyrocketed, funding ambitious projects, land reforms, modern schools, highways, and a push for industrialization. Tehran became a glittering capital of skyscrapers and neon lights, a showcase of rapid modernization. Yet beneath the surface, the wealth was unevenly distributed. Urban elites enjoyed prosperity while rural communities struggled. The oil boom of the 1970s filled state coffers but also fueled corruption, inefficiency, and a growing disconnect between rulers and ordinary citizens. The economy was modernizing, but it was also centralizing power, leaving millions of Iranians feeling excluded from the dream of prosperity. By the late 1970s, the contradictions of oil wealth reached a breaking point. Inflation soared, rural poverty persisted, and foreign workers often earned more in Iran than locals. The economy, though glittering on the surface, was fragile beneath. Oil had made Iran powerful but also dependent, a one-resource economy vulnerable to political shocks. The frustration of the people exploded in the 1979 Islamic Revolution, a movement fueled not only by demands for political change, but also by anger at economic injustice. The revolution toppled the Shah, expelled Western oil companies, and declared that Iran's resources would serve its people and its faith. Yet this bold promise would soon collide with new challenges: sanctions, isolation, and war that would define Iran's economy for decades to come. In 1979, when the Islamic Revolution swept across Iran, the new leadership vowed to build an economy rooted in justice, self-reliance, and Islamic values. The expulsion of Western oil companies and the nationalization of key industries were seen as victories for sovereignty. But almost immediately, the young republic was tested by one of the most devastating conflicts in modern Middle Eastern history. The Iran-Iraq War, 1980 to 1988. For 8 brutal years, oil fields were bombed, infrastructure destroyed, and millions of young men mobilized. The war drained resources, crippled growth, and left cities scarred. Instead of directing oil revenues toward development, much of the economy was consumed by survival. By the war's end, Iran's economy was exhausted, its industries battered, and its people weary, but the state had survived, and with it, the determination to rebuild. The 1990s brought a period of cautious reconstruction. Iran sought to rebuild its industries, restore its oil output, and reconnect with the global economy. Infrastructure projects resumed, universities expanded, and a growing middle class began to take shape. Yet this progress was constantly shadowed by sanctions imposed by the United States and its allies. These restrictions targeted Iran's oil exports, banking system, and access to international markets. The effect was twofold. While sanctions stifled foreign investment and slowed growth, they also forced Iran to turn inward, developing domestic industries, advancing scientific research, and creating networks of regional trade outside Western control. Necessity became the mother of innovation, but the costs were heavy unemployment, inflation, and recurring currency crises. Despite the sanctions, Iran diversified its economy beyond oil. Its agricultural sector remained vital, producing wheat, rice, pistachios, saffron, and dates that reached markets across Asia and the Middle East. Iran became a hub for automobiles, steel, and petrochemicals, industries that supplied not only its domestic market but also neighboring countries. The country's rich natural resources, copper, zinc, and natural gas added depth to its economic potential. Yet oil remained the lifeline. Even as leaders spoke of reducing dependence, petroleum exports continued to provide the majority of government revenue. Every fluctuation in global oil prices echoed through Iranian households, reminding citizens that prosperity was still chained to the wells of Khuzestan and the Gulf. The 2000s and 2010s brought new waves of sanctions, particularly targeting Iran's nuclear program. These measures slashed oil exports, isolated Iranian banks from the global financial system, and triggered soaring inflation. For ordinary Iranians, this meant rising food prices, shortages of medicines, and dwindling purchasing power. Yet, amid the hardship, Iran adapted. Black market trade routes thrived. Regional partnerships with countries like China, Russia, and Turkey deepened, and a culture of economic resilience emerged. Iranian entrepreneurs turned to technology, e-commerce, and startups, creating digital lifelines that bypassed restrictions. The resilience of the Iranian people's shopkeepers, farmers, students, and scientists became the backbone of survival. Even when global powers sought to choke the nation's economy into submission. Today, Iran's economy stands at a crossroads. With one of the largest proven reserves of oil and natural gas in the world, it holds enormous potential. Its youthful, educated population fuels innovation and creativity. Yet challenges remain daunting. Sanctions continue to restrict growth. Corruption undermines progress, and dependence on oil makes the nation vulnerable to global markets. Still, Iran is not merely surviving, it is adapting, finding strength in its culture of resistance and its ability to endure. The story of Iran's economy is not just about numbers or policies. It is about a people who have faced invasions, embargoes, and isolation and still refuse to surrender their dream of independence. In every bustling bazaar, every field of saffron, every car factory and software startup, there lies the unbroken spirit of a nation determined to chart its own economic destiny. Current situation. In the heart of the Middle East, Iran stands as both a nation and an enigma's political system, a complex blend of ancient traditions, revolutionary ideals, and modern statecraft. Since the Islamic Revolution of 1979, Iran has been ruled under the framework of the Islamic Republic, a hybrid system that fuses democracy with clerical authority. At its center stands the supreme leader, the highest religious and political authority, whose influence extends over the military, judiciary, and state broadcasting. Alongside him operates the president, elected every 4 years, who manages the government's day-to-day affairs. Then there is the Majlis Parliament, a body of elected lawmakers. Yet their decisions often remain subject to the oversight of the Guardian Council, a group of clerics and jurists who determine what aligns with Islamic law. This intricate balance of power creates a system both resilient and rigid, capable of adapting to crises, yet resistant to fundamental change. Within this system lies a constant tension: the push and pull between reformists and conservatives. Reformist leaders like the late President Mohammad Khatami called for greater freedoms, dialogue with the West, and cultural openness. Conservative factions, however, sought to guard the revolution's original principles, emphasizing religious orthodoxy, resistance to foreign influence, and a self-reliant economy. This struggle has defined Iranian politics for decades, with the pendulum swinging back and forth depending on elections, public pressure, and global events. But beneath these political battles lies a deeper current, the voice of the Iranian people, millions of citizens who dream of a future where prosperity, dignity, and freedom coexist with faith and tradition. For the people of Iran, daily life is often a negotiation between pride and frustration. On one hand, there is immense pride in the nation's survival against foreign invasions, sanctions, and isolation. On the other, there is frustration over unemployment, corruption, and restrictions on social freedoms. Iran's educated youth, many of whom graduate from some of the region's best universities, often find themselves struggling to secure jobs that match their skills. Women, who make up more than half of university graduates, continue to push against social and legal barriers. These internal struggles spill into the streets during times of crisis. From the student protests of 1999 to the Green Movement of 2009, and more recent demonstrations calling for economic relief and political reform. Each protest, though met with resistance, adds another chapter to the story of a society constantly negotiating with its rulers. The Iranian leadership often frames these tensions as a battle of survival, surrounded by rival powers, targeted by sanctions, and painted as a global adversary by Western narratives. The state views dissent not merely as domestic unrest, but as part of a larger geopolitical game. This perspective explains the government's heavy hand in suppressing protests, censoring media, and restricting political opposition. Yet, even as the state tightens control, it cannot fully silence the demands of its citizens. Social media platforms, despite restrictions, have given Iranians new ways to express themselves, connect with the outside world, and amplify their calls for change. The voices of poets, filmmakers, and musicians resonate far beyond Iran's borders, carrying messages of resilience, sorrow, and hope. Thus, Iran today exists in a delicate balance between tradition and modernity, authority and reform, isolation and global integration. Its political system, born from revolution, continues to evolve under the weight of internal dissent and external pressure. To understand Iran's current situation is to see a nation in motion, a country wrestling with the legacy of its past while struggling to shape its future. And within this struggle lies the very soul of Iran, resilient, restless, and determined to define its destiny on its own terms. Iran's position in the Middle East has always been pivotal. Geographically, it sits at the crossroads of Asia, bordered by Iraq, Turkey, Afghanistan, and the Persian Gulf, a region rich in oil and gas that fuels the global economy. Politically, Iran has embraced the identity of a regional power since the 1979 revolution, positioning itself as the champion of resistance against Western dominance and a defender of oppressed peoples, particularly Palestinians. This role has placed Iran in direct confrontation with the United States, Israel, and at times its Arab neighbors. While much of the world views Iran through the lens of nuclear negotiations or regional proxy wars for Iranians, these stances symbolize national pride, proof that, despite sanctions and isolation, their country refuses to bow. At the core of Iran's regional influence is its network of alliances and proxies, often referred to as the axis of resistance. Through financial, military, and ideological support, Iran has extended its reach into Lebanon via Hezbollah, into Syria through its backing of Bashar al-Assad's regime, into Iraq with powerful Shia militias, and into Yemen with the Houthi movement. These alliances serve multiple purposes: to counter U.S. military presence, to pressure Israel, and to establish Iran as a guardian of Shia communities across the Middle East. Yet, this strategy has also embroiled Iran in conflicts that drain its economy and invite international condemnation. To its supporters, Iran is a fortress of defiance. To its critics, it is a destabilizing force. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in the tension between power and survival. The most contentious issue in Iran's global standing has been its nuclear program. For decades, Iran has insisted that its pursuit of nuclear technology is for peaceful energy production, a right guaranteed under international law. However, suspicions from the West, particularly the United States and Israel, have fueled fears that Tehran's true ambition is to develop nuclear weapons. The landmark 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, briefly offered hope of resolution. Sanctions were lifted in exchange for strict limits on Iran's nuclear activities. Yet, the U.S. withdrawal from the deal in 2018 reignited tensions, crippling Iran's economy and escalating mistrust. Today, the nuclear question remains unresolved, a ticking clock that shapes Iran's relationship with the world. These geopolitical struggles have left Iran navigating a delicate balance between East and West, while relations with the United States remain hostile. Iran has increasingly turned toward Russia and China, seeking economic partnerships and military cooperation. Beijing, hungry for energy, has become one of Iran's largest oil customers, while Moscow views Tehran as a valuable ally in countering Western influence. This eastward shift represents not only a pragmatic survival strategy, but also a redefinition of Iran's place in the global order. Where once it looked westward toward modernization under the Shah, today Iran looks eastward toward alternative centers of power. Betting on a multipolar future in the grand theater of international politics, Iran plays a role that is both feared and admired. To its allies, it is a steadfast partner resisting imperialism. To its adversaries, it is a challenge to the stability of the global system. Yet beyond the headlines and diplomatic standoffs lies the everyday reality of a nation whose people yearn for peace, prosperity, and dignity. Iran's regional power is undeniable, but it comes at a cost: economic hardship, diplomatic isolation, and the constant risk of conflict. As the world watches, Iran stands at a crossroads. Its choice is destined to shape not only its own future, but also the fate of the entire Middle East inside Iran's borders. The greatest challenge may not be foreign pressure, but the growing divide between state authority and the aspirations of its people. The Iranian population is remarkably young. Over 60% are under the age of 35. And they carry dreams that often clash with the restrictions of the system. For them, the struggle is not only about politics, but about life itself. Access to jobs, freedom of expression, opportunities to connect with the wider world. Social movements, from demands for women's rights to calls for internet freedom, highlight a society that refuses to remain static. Each new generation questions the limitations imposed upon it, planting seeds of change that, though suppressed, continue to grow beneath the surface. The women of Iran stand at the forefront of these demands. In classrooms, laboratories, and universities, women are leading voices of progress. Yet in public spaces, they face mandatory dress codes, restrictions on political participation, and barriers to equality. The recent waves of protests sparked by women's rights issues have captured global attention, with images of young women removing headscarves becoming powerful symbols of resistance. These acts are not simply about dress. They represent a larger struggle for agency, dignity, and freedom. In the courage of these women lies the heartbeat of Iran's future. Generation determined to reshape the nation's identity from within. Economically, the nation faces a storm of difficulties. U.S. sanctions have crippled key industries, reduced oil exports, and isolated Iran from international banking systems. Inflation bites into household budgets. Unemployment leaves many young people disillusioned, and corruption erodes trust in institutions. Yet, despite these challenges, Iranians display remarkable resilience. Local businesses, underground art, scenes, and a growing digital community reveal a spirit of adaptation as citizens find creative ways to survive and thrive. This duality of hardship and resilience defines modern Iran, where despair and hope coexist in a fragile equilibrium. Looking toward the future, Iran stands at a crossroads. The government continues to assert control, guided by a belief in self-reliance and resistance to Western influence. But beneath the official narrative lies an undeniable truth. The Iranian people are changing faster than the state. The voices of reform grow louder with every passing year, echoed in literature, music, cinema, and even the digital activism that persists despite censorship. The question that lingers is not whether Iran will change, but how and at what cost will reform emerge from within the system, or will pressure from below and abroad ignite something more radical? And so, the story of Iran remains unfinished. It is the story of a nation that has survived empires, invasions, revolutions, and sanctions. A land of poets and prophets, conquerors and dreamers. Today, as the world watches, Iran continues its eternal balancing act between past and future, isolation and connection, repression and freedom. Its people, scarred but unbroken, carry forward the legacy of a civilization that has always endured. Whatever storms may come, one truth is certain. The spirit of Persia, resilient, proud, and eternal, will continue to shine, shaping the destiny of not only a nation, but an entire region for generations to come. This was the story of Persia, a land of timeless echoes and eternal dreams. I'm your host, and you've been watching Historic Horizon TV, where history lives and the past shapes our future.